Heads up.
Good morning. It's clear that the Prime Minister and the Liberals have no intention of ending their cover-up on the WE scandal. They've continued to block the testimony of key witnesses. And at the Defense Committee, Liberals are continuing to block the appearance of key staff with direct knowledge of the sexual misconduct scandal involving the Minister of National Defense and the former Chief of Defense Staff. We've seen this since last summer, that the Prime Minister is willing to go to extreme lengths to cover up corruption and misdeeds in his government. First, he prorogued Parliament, and then committee members were forced to withstand dozens of hours and dozens of meetings of filibusters by Liberal members. As soon as opposition members get close to the truth and start unearthing answers for Canadians on these two very important issues, one, sexual misconduct in the military, and two, on the conflict of interest in pandemic spending, that this government is continuing to go to great lengths to hide the truth from Canadians. So today, the Conservative opposition is putting forward a motion to end these cover-ups. We're calling for the testimony of Rick Teese, who is who's a senior advisor, a director of policy and cabinet affairs to the Prime Minister, Amit Pal Singh, who's the Deputy Prime Minister's policy advisor, Ben Chin, the Prime Minister's senior advisor, Zita Astravas, formerly the Minister of National Defence's Chief of Staff and the Prime Minister's Director of Issue Management, and currently the Minister of Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness Chief of Staff, as well as the Privy Council Office due diligence report on the Canada Student Service Grant that was previously committed by the Chief Clerk of the Privy Council. So all of these individuals have direct knowledge of the issues that the committees have been studying, and they must testify so that Canadians can have the truth. It's disappointing that after so many months, the Prime Minister continues to go to great lengths to conceal the truth from Canadians. Parliamentarians have very important work to undertake, and these committee studies, both at National Defence and the Ethics Committee, are part of that important work. The pattern of cover-up that's been conducted using prorogation and filibusters is not something that Canadians will be forced to endure for any longer. Now, of course, there is an alternative should the Prime Minister still refuse to allow these individuals to testify, and we're going to give him the opportunity to testify in place of those witnesses should the Liberal government insist that they not appear. The bottom line is that the members of our Canadian Armed Forces deserve a government, they deserve a minister, they deserve a Prime Minister and a Chief of Defence Staff who will stop at nothing to protect them from sexual misconduct. What they have instead right now is a government who will stop at nothing to conceal sexual misconduct. For 3 years, the Prime Minister and his Minister of National Defence failed to take action, and in fact, the only action they did take was to award a raise to the Chief of Defence Staff after learning these very troubling allegations. And of course, in a situation where the Prime Minister's family was paid and benefited close to $500,000 from an organization that was then awarded a $500 million contract to administer for the government, Canadians, of course, deserve answers about how that came to pass, particularly with the inconsistencies in testimony. And now that testimony has only been dragged out over almost a year as a result of the delay and stalling tactics employed by the government. So today, we will put this motion forward in the House, and we will have a vote on it in the House. And we encourage all members of Parliament to support these efforts at transparency. And now I'll invite the opposition House Leader, my colleague, Gerard Deltell, to speak to as well.
Merci beaucoup, Michael. Thank you, Michael. Merci à vous tous d'être présents pour cette conférence de presse. L'éthique est un grave problème pour le gouvernement Trudeau et les Canadiens doivent avoir des réponses claires à des questions légitimes et pertinentes quand il est question de dépenses des fonds publics et quand il est question de conduite inappropriée en matière de conduite sexuelle inappropriée concernant l'armée. Ces deux sujets-là touchent directement l'éthique du premier ministre, touchent directement l'éthique du gouvernement. C'est pourquoi aujourd'hui, nous déposons une motion qui vise à permettre à ceux qui ont été témoins et qui ont des choses à dire de pouvoir le faire en comité parlementaire, là où ça doit se faire. Nous savons que M. Trudeau a de graves problèmes avec l'éthique. Il est l'objet d'une autre enquête de l'éthique et ce n'est pas sa première. Il y a eu le rapport Trudeau 1, le rapport Trudeau 2, il va bientôt avoir le rapport Trudeau 3. Jamais un premier ministre en exercice a été l'objet d'une enquête d'éthique sur son comportement alors qu'il était premier ministre. M. Trudeau, c'est pas une fois, pas deux fois, 3 fois. On se souvient que M. Trudeau a littéralement fermé le Parlement l'été dernier lorsque, entre autres, Michael Barrett, Pierre Poilievre et d'autres députés conservateurs coinçaient le gouvernement dans le scandale de We Charity. M. Trudeau a eu la brillante idée et antidémocratique idée de fermer le Parlement. Eh bien là, il ne pourra pas le faire. Il faut qu'il réponde aux questions des Canadiens. Donc, les libéraux mènent une campagne de dissimulation coordonnée pour empêcher les témoins de témoigner à la fois sur le scandale de We Charity, mais également sur les conduites sexuelles dans les forces armées canadiennes. Le fait est que les libéraux ne veulent pas que des témoins clés puissent témoigner. Notre motion, si elle est adoptée, va permettre à ces témoins de parler, va permettre surtout aux Canadiens d'avoir les faits, d'avoir la vérité. Comme vous le savez, la semaine prochaine, le Parlement, la Chambre des communes, ne siège pas ni la semaine prochaine ni la semaine suivante. Mais les comités, eux, peuvent et doivent servir. Et c'est pourquoi, si tout va bien et cette motion est adoptée ce soir, nous verrons le résultat, eh bien, dès la semaine prochaine, les comités d'éthique et de défense nationale pourront siéger et pourront entendre les témoins concernant ces deux histoires-là. Nous estimons que les Canadiens ont droit à la vérité. Nous estimons que cette motion d'aujourd'hui porte sur la vérité et l'éthique du gouvernement. Il est temps que le gouvernement Trudeau mette de côté sa partisanerie et comprenne que lorsqu'il y a des histoires aussi odieuses que celle de We Charity ou encore des conduites inappropriées dans l'armée canadienne, la liberté a ses droits. Merci.
We will now start the question period. As a reminder, one question, one follow-up. Nous allons maintenant commencer la période de questions, comme une question et une question de suivi. Opératrice, avons-nous une première question au téléphone?
Thank you, merci. The first question, la première question de Louis Blouin, Radio-Canada. La parole est à vous, please go ahead.
Bonjour, M. Deltell. La Cour suprême s'apprête à trancher sur la constitutionnalité d'une taxe sur le carbone. Évidemment, le jugement n'est pas sorti. Je voudrais vous entendre sur les deux scénarios. Si la Cour suprême dit que la tarification sur le carbone est constitutionnelle, est-ce que ça va vous forcer à changer votre approche quand une voix aussi qui porte autant dit que c'est constitutionnel? Si on dit que ce n'est pas constitutionnel, qu'est-ce que ça veut dire pour la suite des choses pour vous?
Merci beaucoup, M. Blouin. Écoutez, comme vous le savez, vous l'avez vous-même dit, la décision n'est pas encore rendue. Donc, par respect pour la Cour suprême, par respect pour le jugement de la Cour suprême, par respect pour les Canadiens, attendons de voir ce que la Cour va dire pour après ça pouvoir commenter. Je tiens quand même à vous rappeler que nous estimons que la façon de combattre les changements climatiques, de combattre les problèmes que nous avons avec la pollution, ce n'est pas en créant la taxe sur le carbone. Nous l'avons vécu au Québec, j'ai moi-même participé au vote à ce moment-là. avec la question de la bourse sur le carbone, et puis les résultats ne sont pas là. Donc, nous, notre approche est différente. Maintenant, sur le fond des choses, concernant le jugement de la Cour suprême, laissons la Cour suprême rendre son jugement. La journée est encore jeune. On aura l'occasion de revenir là-dessus, M. Blouin.
Ce soir, il y a 9 votes sur les crédits budgétaires, les dépenses qui sont, sauf erreur, des votes de confiance. J'aimerais savoir quelles sont vos intentions sur ces votes-là ce soir, M. Deltell. Est-ce que vous allez voter avec le gouvernement?
Alors, sur la question des votes qui auront lieu ce soir, on sait que ça concerne évidemment les budgets. Les budgets, c'est une situation qui, évidemment, est très importante. On a soulevé des problèmes concernant la gestion des fonds publics et on va continuer à le faire. Les votes seront connus ce soir, mais je tiens à vous rappeler que nous, concernant la gestion des fonds publics, il faut qu'on fasse notre travail sérieusement et correctement. Je vous rappellerai que quand on le fait trop rapidement, ça conduit à des erreurs du genre, comme on a connu avec le fameux 1 000 $ que les gens qui étaient à l'extérieur pouvaient profiter. C'était pas la bonne chose à faire. Donc, on aura les votes ce soir et vous aurez notre point de vue là-dessus.
Mais allez-vous appuyer le gouvernement ou pas?
Vous allez le voir tantôt.
Opératrice, avons-nous une seconde question?
Thank you. Merci. The next question is from Mike Lakuta, Global News. Please go ahead. La parole est à vous.
Good morning, gentlemen. I want to ask maybe Mr. Barrett. So the Prime Minister testified for hours, so did his Chief of Staff, Katie Telford, in the We Charity scandal. And I wanted to know what more you're hoping to learn from staffers below them or underneath them in the Prime Minister's office that you don't already know or you haven't already seen in the thousands of pages of documents.
Well, I think it's important to note that the thousands of pages of documents that we received included thousands of redactions. They were heavily blacked out. The Prime Minister testified before we received those documents, and then as soon as we received them, of course, prorogued Parliament. So we've seen in those documents that there were multiple contacts between individuals in the Prime Minister's office and directly with people at the We organization. And so we have questions about that because that contradicts the testimony that we heard from the Prime Minister, from his Chief of Staff. Ideally, the Liberal members at committee would allow these witnesses to come forward, and the Prime Minister would not need to testify. That's a decision for them to undertake. But opposition members at committee have been clear at who we are looking to speak with, and the Liberal members have been clear that they're going to block those efforts. So we need to get answers on this. And frankly, had Parliament not been shut down by the Prime Minister last August, I expect that we could have resolved this issue much sooner. But of course, when Parliament resumed, there was the equivalent of 20 meetings at the Ethics Committee alone that were filibustered by the Liberals. So there's been a pause in the pursuit of answers, and that was precipitated, of course, by the delay and cover-up tactics that the Liberals employed.
Just as a follow-up, I wanted to ask you, what have you been hearing from Canadians that leads you to believe that they want to hear more details about the We Charity instead of the procurement and delivery of vaccines? Because it would seem that that's, for Canadians, that would be more top of mind.
Well, fortunately, we're able to do both. We have very talented parliamentarians in our caucus who are holding the government to account specifically on the issue of procurement of vaccines. I think you heard questions in the House of Commons yesterday from our Shadow Minister for Health, Michelle Rempel, to the Prime Minister that he failed to answer those questions. And in this case, we have $500 million on the We Charity issue that was going to be going to an organization. They would have benefited over $40 million for the administration of those funds. And it was a process that, that involves serious questions about what the relationship was between the Prime Minister's family, this organization, and the awarding of that grant. The other issue that we're addressing today, of course, is the filibuster and the failure of the Liberals to allow the truth to come to light at the Defense Committee. We have a situation where the former Chief of Defense Staff was accused of sexual misconduct in 2018, and at that time, the the Minister of National Defense and the Prime Minister were made aware of those allegations and did nothing about it, and then later gave him a raise. And so I think that issue is tremendously important to Canadians writ large, but also to the men and women of the Canadian Armed Forces. As I mentioned before, the bare minimum that the Government of Canada can do for them is to ensure an environment where they're protected from sexual misconduct, particularly when it's perpetrated by Canada's top soldier. So the question of $500 million in pandemic spending, the question of sexual misconduct in the military, those are both germane to Canadians. But also this week, we introduced a motion on our other opposition day with respect to the pandemic. So we continue to hold the government to account on multiple fronts, and we look forward to debating this issue today.
Thank you. We'll now go in the room for a question.
Teresa Wright from the Canadian Press. Just following up on my colleague's question there, I've actually been working from home, much like a lot of MPs in the Maritimes for the last year, and I'm just returning back to Ottawa. And I have to say I didn't hear about the We Charity affair for many, many months now. So, on that side of the country. So how much do you think Canadians, maybe in areas outside of, Toronto and Ottawa, really care about this issue?
Well, welcome back. And I think that, that was a desired effect that the government had, that the Prime Minister wanted to have when he shut down Parliament. We were holding hearings that saw the Prime Minister appear, that saw an order for a production of thousands of pages of documents. And instead of giving the opposition the opportunity to review those documents and then to follow up at committee and then to have that committee study concluded, the Prime Minister prorogued. And so the effect that the Prime Minister was looking to have by shutting down Parliament was shutting down questions, shutting down that part of the conversation. So we have an obligation to finish the work that we started, in the summer. And when we're talking about $500 million spent during a pandemic, when the Prime Minister ought to have been, with his cabinet, focused on domestic vaccine production capacity, focused on making sure that we had personal protective equipment, making sure that they had a plan, once those things were in place that they ought to have put in place, that we could reopen and that lockdowns would end. Instead, the government failed to do those things. And what we're hearing about is procurement arrangements that involve sole source deals to well-connected liberal insiders. And so it would be a failure of our responsibility as the official opposition in the House of Commons to not pursue this matter. And so while I hope that the government can focus on the lives and livelihoods of Canadians, that's what they've been elected to do. They failed to do that on a number of occasions, and now they need to answer for what they were doing instead of that.
I think I'm hearing from you why you think it's important and why your party thinks it's important, but why do you think Canadians should pay attention to this, given that they're facing the pandemic over the last year, all of the impacts on their homes, their businesses, their lives? Why do you think that they should care so much about this issue as much as you do?
Well, of course, we're hearing from Canadians that they care. And we've also seen that the government had committed $912 million, nearly $1 billion, to support students during a pandemic and didn't spend it. They tried to cut a backroom deal with an organization that had paid members of the Prime Minister's family $500,000, and then it said, you guys can probably sort this out and you'll benefit $40 million for your trouble. So the government failed to execute. They failed to deliver on helping students. And so, again, I think that students should be very interested how it came to pass that the government failed to deliver the relief that they had committed to. We had all kinds of folks who wanted more funding for the Canada Summer Jobs Program. The government did not do that. Again, this year, we don't know. A week ago, we heard one of the parliamentary secretaries say that the government might consider a new program for students for this summer, for post-secondary students this summer. So they're looking at developing one now at the end of March. And we're less than 60 days from university and college students and high school graduates looking for their summer employment. So again, the government has a scattershot response. They have spent record amounts of money, and achieve very little progress as a result of that. And so we're going to keep asking those questions. And we think it's very important to Canadians that when the government's spending hundreds of millions and billions of dollars, that it's done in an effective way, particularly so that they can help small businesses and families and seniors. And we want to see that. That's why we've been calling on the government to introduce a budget. And now, after more than 2 years, it looks like they might do that in April.
Thank you. We'll now go back on the phone for another question. Opératrice, une autre question?
Thank you. Merci. La prochaine question, Laurence Martin, Radio-Canada. Please go ahead. La parole est à vous.
Oui, bonjour. Je voulais savoir, la Cour suprême vient de trancher. Elle estime que la loi... Excusez-moi, c'est parce que j'étais en train de courir. Elle estime que donc les changements climatiques sont réels, constituent un défi existentiel, que en fait donne raison au gouvernement fédéral sur toute la ligne là, contre l'Alberta, l'Ontario et la Saskatchewan. C'est une journée difficile pour les conservateurs aujourd'hui.
Alors, je reprenez votre souffle, Mme Martin, comme justement vous démontrez, ça vient tout juste de tomber. Alors, écoutez, c'est un enjeu sérieux, c'est la Cour suprême, c'est très sérieux. Alors, par respect pour la Cour suprême, nous allons prendre le temps de regarder ça. C'est avec plaisir qu'on va vous revenir une fois qu'on aura fait notre travail sérieusement. Et je vous invite à reprendre votre souffle.
Mais juste pour, en termes de suivi, est-ce que ce n'est pas le temps pour, comme le jugement de la Cour suprême est très important, est-ce que ce n'est pas le temps pour les conservateurs de se ranger là, derrière une taxe sur le carbone? On a une autre voie importante aujourd'hui là, qui s'ajoute en faveur de ce genre de mécanisme.
Nous avons énormément de respect pour la Cour suprême et soyez sans crainte, nous aurons l'occasion de revenir à ce sujet-là au cours de la journée, mais par respect pour le sérieux qui a été fait par la Cour suprême, si je commence à vous répondre sur un texte que je n'ai pas lu, que je n'ai pas eu le temps de regarder attentivement, je comprends que vous le faites, vous êtes très présente et vous courez pour me poser la question, je salue votre sollicitude pour être présente, mais la réalité, c'est qu'on va prendre le temps de regarder ça et soyez sans crainte, on aura l'occasion de dire quelque chose une fois qu'on aura, avec sérieux et rigueur, regarder quelles sont les conclusions et les lire correctement. Si j'improvise une réponse sur quelque chose que je n'ai pas lu, je ne serai pas professionnel. Merci.
Merci, opératrice. Avez-vous une autre question?
Thank you. Merci. La prochaine question est de Mike Lecouteur, Global News. Please go ahead. La parole est à vous.
Thanks. I wanted to get in there just because of what Laurence just said, and I'm going to assume that Mr. Barrett, you probably feel the same way as Mr. Deltell, but I got to take a shot at it. I wanted to know if you can tell me the Conservatives' response to what the Supreme Court has just ruled.
And what's the ruling from the Supreme Court, Mike? I've been here.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, that they basically ruled in favor of the federal government for the carbon tax, so against the provinces.
Right. So, a ruling from the Supreme Court that's been released in the last couple of minutes is definitely something that I'm going to want to take a look at, along with my Conservative colleagues, out of respect for the work that the Supreme Court has done, and of course for all of the interveners in the case. It would be inappropriate to wade too far into that. Obviously, we don't support the carbon tax that punishes Canadians for driving to work and the doctor's office and costs them more for groceries, farmers for drying grain, and the government needs to have a credible plan to reduce emissions without having a punitive effect on people for living their lives, and so I'll look forward to reviewing the court's decision.
Just as a follow-up, though, coming out of this weekend of the Conservatives' convention and the debate that you had over climate change being real, do you think now that the highest court in the land has said this, that this needs to change the discussion within the Conservative Party?
The leader of our party, Aaron O'Toole, was very clear when he spoke on Friday night, and I think he was very clear when he held a press conference this week on this issue, and so. We've said many times that, of course, we're going to have a credible plan for addressing climate change, and we'll have that plan before the next election. And what that plan will do is make sure that we reduce emissions without killing jobs and without making life unaffordable for everyday Canadians.
Dans le temps pour une dernière question. Avez-vous une autre question?
Thank you. Merci. There are no further questions registered at this time. Nous n'avons plus de questions pour le moment. I would now like to turn the meeting back over to you.
Great, thank you. This concludes the press conference. Ceci met fin à la conférence de presse. Merci.
Thank you.
Thank you. Merci. The conference has now ended. La conférence est maintenant terminée. Please disconnect your lines at this time. Veuillez, s'il vous plaît, raccrocher votre ligne. Thank you.